Hi class, I wanted to welcome you to CPT Coding. This is the book that we're using this semester, and we are also using this workbook. So the big thing is I'm sharing my notes here. We want to make sure that you can differentiate between the ICD-10 PCS and CPT. That can be a real problem learning if you don't know right now what those distinctions are. The American Medical Association, or AMA, and some third-party payers developed CPT in the 1960s as a way to communicate between third-party payers and physicians. However, it wasn't until the 1980s when hospitals began to use CPT. You can read over these notes. I wanted to point out that in number 4, you can find on page 14 the example of the UB04, and on page 12 is a CMS 1500 form. Those are good examples you can read here. That's how we communicate those services that were provided. I remember back when I started, we physically printed those out on the forms, so if you didn't put them in the printer correctly, you certainly were going to have a lot of wasted, expensive forms, and then we would manually stamp the physician's signature one by one on all those forms before we stuck them in a big envelope and sent those out. But luckily, those days are over, and you can look at those forms and read more about that in the chapter. Another thing is some of the routine services in the hospital. It addresses the charge master. That's also sometimes referred to as the CDM, or charge description master. So you should be aware of that. If you go out to your clinicals, you might hear reference to that. Most places do already have that hard-coded in there, so you're not picking out chest x-rays and certain labs. However, my last job, the coder actually did enter charges, so it just depends on the work setting. Number 6 here addresses HCPCS. That does tend to throw people off. So if you would read the little details here about when and when not to use HCPCS. There's, I think, a reference to HCPCS and CPT describe what services were performed, whereas ICD-10 describes why. I hope you get off to a great start this semester. If you have any questions, please let us know ahead of time. But as you'll see, there's a lot of workbook work, review, and the purpose of that is to get you all the more familiar with the requirements of CPT versus those other coding groups like ICD-10, ICD-10 PCS, and make sure that you're familiar just with seeing, just at a glance, you recognize the CPT codes.